All right, I realize that I've spent a lot of time talking about axioms 1, 2, 3, a little bit about vertical comms, axiom 5, but I haven't spent enough time on axiom 4. Axiom 4 is pretty important, though. Axiom 4 in the IAC covers immutable truth or objective truth. There are things built into the game engine of reality that are just going to be true. We can't just will ourselves or think ourselves or believe ourselves out of the truth of the core physics engine for this game. So there's certain things that are going to have to happen. Otherwise, the gameplay itself falls apart. And we don't want the gameplay to fall apart. We don't want the players to be able to come in here and completely trash the game environment. But just as a reminder, Axiom 1 is the realization of the I. The player understands who they are. The second one is they realize that the ideas exist as well. They understand that even their concept of the I is an idea. And they realize that in Axiom 3, they are the creator of their own ideas. It's a combination of the I and the dia, which forms ideas, gives life to ideas, and as they grow legs, they can get stronger and stronger and become beliefs that are entities of their own and want our attention, and they also have an impact on the reality bubble that we experience, the physical gameplay that we experience. So the player's objective in the game is to learn to manage and manipulate the environment by first gaining control of what belief set loadout they have. That is their map to the game. If they can control and have a good, clean map, they can have a better playthrough experience. So that is a critical part of the game. However, not all players are going to do this. Players are going to take different quest lines, and also quest lines can be set up as challenges by the player. The player can agree to certain quest lines. In the before state, where the player has no limitations on it like it does in this state, the greater I, the oversoul I, the EYE I, might establish some playthrough challenges for the lower I. And in this state, when the I enters into this gaming, soul-forging gaming network, it is placed into an environment of great limitation, amnesia, trying to figure it out, puzzle solving. This creates disorientation and a host of other fears and potential negative beliefs and bad coding. And this all leads us to the problem of pain and suffering, which we have to discuss Axiom 4 when we get to the point of discussing why we have such pain and suffering in this environment. Because the first thing that we need to understand is that the game itself is coded to steer the player away from harm. And that signal, that feedback loop, is often through pain. The thing that keeps you from hovering your hand over the fire is that pain. And that pain is an essential ingredient to the game engine in order to keep you from really destroying the game itself and making it unplayable. Pain is a necessary component to the game in order for you to play it correctly. In the same, likewise, I should say, the ego is a necessary component to entering the game as in Axiom 1. In order for the I to come into this environment, in order for the I to filter through the start button, the greater I, that is, in order for the greater I to enter into this game, it has to filter itself down into a very nerfed condition. So it's a very limiting state. We are experiencing limitations in this environment that we would not be able to experience in a greater state. So you get the amnesia state, you get the limited expanded awareness, you get the sense that you're kind of alone and separated from all that is that separation from your greater self. This is a a game. This is a hardcore game of extreme limitation. And in order to enter this environment in Axiom 1, you have to go through something called the ego. The ego is your user interface with the I, the capital I. The player I has the user interface of the ego, and because that user interface is so strong and it helps them interpret the game and environment, it's often confused with the I itself. A lot of times the ego is seen as the I, not as an instrument for the I to use. So the problem of pain and suffering is often cited by players as an excuse for, let's say, no such thing as vertical communications, no such thing as a creator to the construct of the game, no such thing. In fact, if you look at the Soul Trap, which is the reason I really started the IAC, was to try and figure out my position on the Soul Trap. And the IAC, the game, the Soul Forger, rejects the Soul Trap because of multiple reasons. But one of the things, if you look at Soul Trap, one of its heaviest arguments is that no school or game environment would be built with this level of pain and suffering. It can only be some evil God creator that would or some kind of archon being or some kind of alien entity that would trap us into such a setting. That is one of the core. If you look at Soul Trap, it's hard to escape that we have to deal with why we have pain and suffering if we're going to reject the Soul Trap idea. This also ties into when I wanted to run the Bible through the IAC, I wanted to run Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. And axiom number 4, if you were to line it up with the Beatitudes, lines up with Jesus' statement about blessed are those who mourn. The mourners and the persecuted, that is the suffering and the pain in this game. And it acknowledges that there are difficult quests. And there's a dynamic difficulty scale for players to use. They're not meant to be punishments. They're player-designed game strategies. They also help you gain XP rewards. That is what Jesus would be referring to as the kingdom of heaven. In the game, we would use the terminology as XP rewards. That could be a whole sidebar discussion just on the Beatitudes and how they filter in and connect with the IAC. So the two types of pain and suffering that we see in the game is, one, you have the dynamic difficulty scaling, which could be incorporated into self-imposed quests that are designed in the pre-game environment. You can assign your own boss fights right from the beginning. You can decide to be born with some sort of debilitating disease, whatever it is. You can design a boss fight for your character right from the start. You also can have self-inflicted debuffs in the game, which cause their own challenges. And that happens when we have a corrupted belief mod, or belief mods, or our loadout of beliefs get corrupted with debuff beliefs, or viruses, you could call them. This is why the game forces us to examine our beliefs right from the start. It forces us to uncover what's on the inside and whether or not it's consistent and whether or not it's constructive, whether it's coherent, whether it's resonant. These are the core things to look at with our belief modeling to make sure that we have a unified belief set. Whenever you install or empower a destructive belief or virus, it begins to corrupt your render of the game world. This adds to and creates suffering, dissonance, and system lag. Suffering's not meant to be a vengeful punishment by the developers. It is the game's compassionate and automated correction protocol. It has been argued that our suffering debuff is dialed up too high, that it's too intense, but it has to be so unpleasant that the player is motivated to run a belief audit. It has to be so unpleasant that when a player goes off the grid, it steers them back onto the path. It has to encourage you to delete corrupted files. It has to encourage you to avoid self-harm. These are practical matters, and the pain level is decided upon as the perfect amount to keep players aligned as much as possible in the game. However, even with that said, players still do horrendous things to themselves and to each other, despite the intensity level being what it is. Let's take an example of a self-inflicted suffering and a bad belief. A player installs the belief. Hold on. Let's say the belief is I am unlovable. That's a destructive idea or virus. The self-inflicted difficulty, the mirror principle in Appendix B, will reflect this back to the player. The player will encounter rejection, isolation, failed relationships. Their game becomes lonely and hard. The game's correction, this loneliness, is the signal. It's the game's way of flashing error, code belief, mismatch with source code. It's flashing this back to the player on their HUD. The suffering is the impetus to ask, why is this happening to me? Which is the first step towards discovering the I am unlovable virus and replacing it with a more constructive I am worthy idea and belief. In this manner, in this diagnostic method, even the pain that we create ourselves through our poor concept engineering will become the very tool that is guiding us back to the most expansive and coherent quest lines. So that way, no suffering is really lost or wasted. This would be coherent with any game that is designed and focused on learning and growth, a system that uses our own stumbles as the primary teaching tool. It steers us back to our ultimate objective. We want creative mastery in this game, and we want alignment with our source or source code. We can transform our suffering, but we have to use the tools of the game and have the correct belief loadout. This changes the soul trap from seeing the developers as cruel. It changes the developer as brilliantly designing the system to be responsive and ultimately compassionate in our learning system. Now, the objection that follows or piggybacks off the why is there suffering is that my character is already perfect in pre-game state. I have no reason to enter this limited source because I'm already perfect. There's no need to do it. That is an objection that we hear in the soul trap theory. It is something. Hold on. Sorry, I had to step away and press pause. Where was I, though? Trying to regather my thoughts. Suffering, right? Why? No, imperfection, limitation. That's it. If we're already perfect in pregame state, why would we need to subject ourselves to limitation? And that is suggested in the soul trap theory, and it's classic. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The argument here with the IAC Soul Forger, I mean, the very name Soul Forger, the very name of our game here implies that we want to enhance our soul. We want to forge our soul. So the soul trap is attacking the very essence of the game itself here. That's why the IAC needs to address it. The objection that we're already perfect does make an error, though, because it confuses the potential with expression between the perfect finished symphony written on a sheet of music versus it being performed in actuality. Because in our pregame state, we don't get a chance to really play the instrument. We're just perfect in theory. The I in the game, the I avatar, you are that instrument, not the composer. Your higher self is the composer, the perfect composer, the source of the divine music. The I in the game, the personal self, the one that uses the user interface with the ego and all that other stuff, it is the instrument through which the higher self is performing. The soul forging game isn't about fixing the composer's sheet music, but learning to play the instrument in perfect tune. The amnesia, the limitations, the challenges, these are not because the music is flawed. They are necessary conditions for us to master the instrument through our own effort, our discovery, not just mimicry. How else is a perfect being going to experience these type of things unless it puts itself into its own limitations in an environment such as this? Having experience is not a deficiency of the greater self. It is just the point of this creation. Why would a perfect being create anything? The IAC is stating that it's not static. Unchanging perfection is not the ultimate goal for consciousness. Expression is. Experience is. The perfect, omnipotent consciousness has no need for courage. It faces no threat. It has no need for compassion. It doesn't encounter suffering. It has no need really even for love because it exists in a state of complete unity. It's love. Love is just a natural state for us outside of this reality. Whereas in the soul forging game, the mechanism by which the perfect soul experiences the qualities it embodies, not that the soul needs to learn compassion, it's that compassion as a living force only has meaning when it's expressed towards another in this kind of context of a real struggle. The win condition is conscious reunion. It's not a rescue mission. Our journey's not a flawed shard trying to cobble its way back to a perfect whole. This journey of the player is realizing that its identity with the composer and choosing to play the symphony in perfect harmony. In the beginning, the composer writes the music. In the game, the musician is given the sheet music and learns to play it. So Soul Forger is not about fixing something. It is about creation, creating a masterpiece. You could also take a painting that is imperfect, that sits in a dark vault because nobody can see it. The perfection is potential, and it's unrealized until it's exposed. The IAC is your perfect soul choosing to display itself in the gallery of experience. It's the difference between being a being of love, and then feeling the profound, gritty, heroic reality of love. When your avatar cares for a sick friend, it's the difference of being courage to feeling courage as you face genuine fear. We have examples and practicality of these expressions every day in our day-to-day world. The limitations of this game, the amnesia, the pain, the challenges, are not because your soul is broken. They are just the hardware of the game. And it makes you experience your own perfection. It makes it feel real, earned, and infinitely valuable. The treasures in heaven, the XP reward. Forging isn't about creating something new. It's about discovering what you already are. It's very immersive gameplay. An objection follows saying, but what about a small child that suffers because of nature or other players? No game would set that up, right? And this is a very powerful scenario because it evokes great emotion at the loss of a child and the suffering of a child. And the IAC doesn't dismiss this. It does grapple with it as an objection. The response would be that a multi-lifetime avatar and the nature of the player, we don't see in one lifetime what the grand scheme is of all the lifetimes put together. So the IAC does not look at a single lifespan as the complete story at all. This is the critical pivot point we need to understand, that we must distinguish between the player and the avatar itself and the multi-lifetime progression system that exists. And this is something that the Soul Trap recognizes too, the multi-lifetime system, but it sees the multi-lifetime as a trap cycle rather than a progression system. The avatar's experience is real, but it's not the full story. The pain, the fear, the confusion experienced by a child is 100% real and horrific within the playthrough. The IAC does not ask us to dismiss this or call it an illusion, but to consider that a single playthrough might not be a deliberately chosen. It asks us to consider that this playthrough might be deliberately chosen by a high difficulty scenario, or a high difficulty scenario for someone who would be a veteran player. The tutorial mode versus the hardcore analogy. Some players have mastered the game basics. They might choose hardcore or permadeath mode for a new level of intensity. The suffering immense, the potential for XP is immense, the skill integration correspondingly vast. It's also a medical training sim where a surgeon might suffer and die repeatedly to master a procedure. The suffering is not a trap. It's the price of achieving a specific high-level skill. From that perspective, the soul is experiencing painful life as a child and undergoing an intense forced tutorial. The why is inscrutable, but what now is not. Other players within the game cannot possibly know the specific soul-forging objective of any other player. The why is hidden in the player's private quest log. The IAC provides a clear, constructive answer for what now, the question of how we should respond. This event becomes a server-wide quest for the rest of us. Our quest, the suffering of the child, is a mirror reflecting the collective need for compassion, protection, and healing. It's a call to action for other players to level up their compassion and their justice stat. The trap is failing the quest. The true hell or trap is not the child's suffering, but if the rest of the players respond with indifference, thereby failing the collective morality test and creating a server where such suffering becomes acceptable. The IAC never makes the child's suffering as okay, but it does redeem the pain, and it gives it a context within a larger, purposeful journey. The soul trap theory sees the suffering and concludes the system is evil. It leaves us no constructive path forward except rage or escape. The IAC sees this suffering and concludes that we cannot know the ultimate purpose of a specific playthrough from our limited perspective. Its existence creates an irrefutable moral imperative for us to act, for us to forge our own souls through the fire of compassion and service. And it's consistent with the universe designed not for hedonistic pleasure, but for a profound and difficult development of consciousness through direct experience. Hence the name Soul Forger, which is meant to be an active, positive participation game. And the IAC is integrated, actionable constructivism. That is the root purpose behind this game that we have created here. A child's suffering is not proof of a trap. It is the ultimate test for the IAC framework. It doesn't lead to a coherent, albeit heartbreaking, worldview that still allows for meaning, purpose, and empowered action. The IAC argues resolutely that to see it otherwise is to grant the suffering the final word, that would render this experience as meaningless. The IAC insists on the universe where no pain, no matter how horrific, is ultimately wasted. So pain, basically, is essential in our playthrough. It's going to be part of this experience. To not have pain breaks the system, it breaks the game. Another thing that we have not pointed out in our child suffering scenario is that we are in an Axiom 6 says we are in an open world MMO. The principle of cooperative play. So if we expand this to understand that in our true MMO, no major event exists in a vacuum, the tragic event is never just about the primary avatar involved. It creates a ripple effect. All of our play actions create ripple effects. That's why it's an MMO. So it'll create a ripple effect upon the server, at the very least, directly on the guild or the family, community, society that's connected to the avatar. The suffering of the death of the child is not solitary. It's not a meaningless data point. It is a server-wide event that spawns unique, high stakes and quests for everybody that it touches. For the parents, it has impact, unthinkable forging, sovereignty in the face of despair that they have to fight through. The objective to navigate the absolute worst-case scenario of the family quest line without having your entire consciousness consumed by grief debuffs. To find a way to transmute pain into meaning, to choose love and connection, even when the game's mechanics have delivered the most brutal possible blow. This can unlock rewards, levels of compassion. It can unlock resilience, spiritual depth that are impossible to access in other ways. This is the ultimate hardcore mode in the relationship skill tree. There's a quest for the community and witnesses, a call to action, to move beyond passive sympathy and to active support, to provide a buff of presence and practical aid to those who are suffering. So combine those two experiences. The child player has an intensely focused short duration tutorial in the raw nature of existence, chosen for reasons we cannot see from our limited perspective. And for the rest of us, it's a mandatory server-generated co-op quest. That event would be a catalyst designed to force the rest of the player base to level up critical high difficulty skills like compassion, courage, community, and justice. The soul trap theory looks at this event and sees only a snare, a reason to reject the entire game itself. The IAC looks at the same event and sees a devastating but purposeful catalyst for collective evolution. It argues that the most profound forging of a soul often happens not in solitude, but in response to a shared suffering of our fellow players. It doesn't make tragedy good, but it makes it metaphysically significant. It frames our reality not as hell, but as a universe so dedicated to growth and consciousness that it allows for scenarios where the profound growth of the many is catalyzed by the intense suffering of one. The MMO, or in this MMO, your pain is also my quest and my compassion for your potential healing. We all are forging each other. I should stop and say that I'm noticing this as I've been struggling with pain. I'm on pain meds after the accident. I can't put much pressure on my right leg. It's still swollen. I walk around with crutches, and I can't help but appreciate and notice when other players come to my aid and assist in small ways, like holding a door open for me or getting something because they know it's a difficulty for me to reach it. I am experiencing co-player cooperation on a daily basis because of the pain experience that I am going through with the recent car accident. I also am learning things personally in my own attempt to live with and adapt to the pain that I'm currently in. There's a resilience perk or XP that I'm gaining from the experience. Another area that Soul Trap picks up on, the Soul Trap is a complicated one because it's got a lot of objections built into it. I'd say the strongest is the suffering one. And then the next one would be, why would a perfect being even enter into limited space? So we addressed suffering, and we addressed why we would enter ourselves into a limitation game environment. But the other one is the testimonies of many NDEs. We have so many NDEs now. And we see a common theme in NDEs about going into a tunnel, the light, stepping into the light, sometimes given a choice to come back, and sometimes just being thrust back into this environment. So the Soul Trap people have used these testimonies to say we are being coerced, tricked, forced against our will to come back. And that has become a core argument in the most recent Soul Trap theories that I've heard. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert in Soul Trap theory, but I've read David Icke's book, The Trap. I have read some Gnostic pieces. I've listened to other popular YouTubers on The Trap. And this pointing to NDE experiences and out-of-body experiences is common in the argument for the Soul Trap. All right, I had to take a little break to feed the dog. But I wasn't planning for this to go so long, but since this is a rebuttal of the Soul Trap, and the whole reason I started working on the IAC was trying to contemplate where I stand on the Soul Trap and why I stand in this position on the Soul Trap. So the IAC was created, and one of the points that is made by the Soul Trap people is the NDE experiences themselves. This would be addressing the amnesia veil that's in Axiom D, the fundamental choice between trust and fear. The IAC provides a powerful lens to analyze these conflicting reports So the respawn choice and sovereignty test. So one interpretation is that the choice that we have is an illusion. The loving light, feeling of peace, the offer to return, it's all a big trick by the trappers to lure you back into the prison farm, saying yes, it's falling for the scam. The other interpretation is the forging model, which is my game. The choice is authentic. It's an interface for the player, the larger player, to consult with the game devs or their higher consciousness in the vertical comms and decide if their current playthrough is complete or not. The feeling of peace is that lifting of the amnesia veil, reminding you of your true nature outside the avatar. One thing that is said by all these NDE people so often is they have that inner sense, that inner feeling of being at home. That is a very common theme too. Now we can look at these two interpretations, whether or not it's an elaborate trick or whether or not it's a choice to continue to play. If we look at the constructive side, the coherent and the resonant, and this is how we test our ideas. We look at them for their values and being constructive, coherent, and resonant. So in our interpretation, it is empowering for the player to have the choice to come back. It affirms our sovereignty. Hold on, sorry, I had to step away for a second again, but as you can see, the IAC, the Game Soul Forgers' response to the NDE testimonies that talk about having a choice to come back is that it is constructive. It affirms that we have sovereignty as players. It presents us with the choice. It aligns with the co-op mode in Axiom 5, and suggesting guidance is available. It's coherent. It fits seamlessly with the rest of our framework in the IAC. The amnesia veil lifts. You remember you're a player. You receive comms messages. Your quest isn't finished yet, and you choose to re-engage. It's resonant. The experience is almost universally described as one of profound peace, love, and clarity. The very definition of resonant quality that signals alignment with the source code. If you look at the Soul Trap interpretation of these events, it's very destructive. Their interpretation is fundamentally disempowering. It tells you that even in your most aware state, outside of your avatar, you're still a gullible victim being manipulated. It instills a virus of ultimate mistrust. It is incoherent because it creates a logical black hole. If the trappers are so powerful, they can perfectly mimic a state of divine love. This was my biggest thing here. If they can perfectly mimic divine love and peace to trick you, then resistance is futile. You've already lost. This is a self-nullifying, game-breaking belief. Because I've had that experience in my God encounter. That perfect divine love. I mean, it's so intense, it's beyond words. And yet to think that some trapper, some prison warden can duplicate that level of love and peace, that's game breaking. And it's a classic phishing attack. It takes a real phenomenon, the NDE, and offers a secret interpretation that makes you feel smarter and more aware than the sheeple who trust the light. It creates an in-group, we who know the truth, and it demands a specific fear-based reaction. Reject the light. The IAC's verdict is the choice is a feature and it's not a bug. The IAC argues that the trap interpretation is a belief virus. It preys on the trauma of returning to a limited avatar. Think of the emotional whiplash that you go through from infinite peace and love back to a body that might be broken in pain. The ego mind, struggling to reconcile this, can easily construct the narrative. I was tricked. A lot of people from NDEs come back feeling a little bit of anger about having to about coming back. I mean, that just that is common. But even though there's anger that they're back in this body and they want to get back up into the state that they were in, there still is gifts given. There's greater awareness. A lot of times people from NDEs are fundamentally changed. The passions for life change for them a lot too. The wanting to get ahead in a material world drops. So many times they are just better people. But there is some depression that sets in right after, where you feel like, oh, I want to get back to that state. And that is the ego mind that struggles to reconcile. So these characters do have a brutal re-entry back into the limitations of their avatar and the amnesia veil. It is jarring, and it can encourage a victim narrative. But I also feel like there's people that have near-death experiences, but they're completely mind-wiped when they come back. They can't just bring back everything. So that could explain why some people don't seem to have a choice. Just like in my car accident, where parts of the accident are deleted from my conscious memory, someone could come back from an NDE and not have the full experience, the full memory of the experience. They might have some edits. They might have some missed conversations. They may have all received a conversation about a choice, but they don't remember it, so they think that they were forced back. These are all possibilities. But let's just look at the quality of the beliefs themselves. In the soul trap belief system, it tends to lead more towards fear and paranoia. It's a fundamental mistrust of the very nature of consciousness and love. It is a debuff. The belief system where we have the choice to be here leads to a sense of purpose, trust in one's own journey, and the understanding that even suffering has a place. The IAC advises you to install the beliefs that are constructive, coherent, and resonant. The trap narrative fails on these 3 counts. It is a metaphysical dead end, and it offers no viable gameplay strategy except perpetual powerless suspicion. At least that's what I've seen. I haven't seen any real answers there other than powerless suspicion. The reports of a choice are likely real. The interpretation of that choice as a trick is not evidence of a higher truth. So basically, when I discuss that the idea belief that we do have a choice to be here, there's a criticism often that I'm just being too positive. The objection is that you're just trying to be love and light and be positive thinking only, and you're ignoring the real truth of hardship. You're ignoring the real truth of reality by trusting this simplistic love language. The accusation is that the IAC is being intellectually soft. It is a form of spiritual bypassing that uses good vibes to ignore the genuine brutality and the complexity of the game. A robust defense must show that the IAC is not about denying harshness, but engage in it. So the IAC comes to its conclusion. It doesn't start with the love and light and ignores everything else. It starts with the undeniable axioms that, through a rigorous process, it arrives at a constructive principle. It is the most strategically effective way to play. It does not ignore suffering. The IAC doesn't. This game, we're not denying suffering exists. It just reframes its function. If the critic says the IAC is ignoring real truth of pain, the IAC is saying we have taken a core sample of that pain and analyzed its composition. The real truth of a virus is that it makes you sick. The IAC doesn't deny the sickness. It identifies the virus. It understands its destructive nature. It provides tools, like the belief audit, to delete it. The real truth of a broken leg is pain. The IAC doesn't just say just think happy thoughts. It says the pain is a signal your avatar has taken damage. Let's follow the game's healing mechanics to mend it. To call it hyper-positive is similar to calling a doctor's diagnosis as hyper-healthy, because they focus on treatment rather than just describing the disease. In Axiom 4, we talk about the source code. The source code is not simplistic love and light, it's an immutable physics engine. This is the core misunderstanding. The critic conflates that the IC constructive quality with a naive sentimental love. The IAC is constructive, is similar to the ruthlessness that gravity has. Gravity doesn't care if you love or not. It just is. Beliefs rooted in fear, separation, and hatred, these are destructive ideas, will consistently produce entropy, internal conflict, and external chaos. Beliefs rooted in unity, truth, and sovereignty are constructive, and they will consistently produce coherence, power, and expansion. It's not over-trusting, it's just learning the game's rules. Trusting that fire will burn you isn't simplistic, it's practical. The ISC simply extends this to the realm of consciousness. Trusting, in quotes, trusting that a belief in victimhood will debuff your character isn't faith. It's an observable, testable gameplay mechanic. The IAC demands more rigor, not less. The love and light crowd often seek to avoid darkness. The IAC player is tasked with entering the darkness, but you enter it with a flashlight and a map. The mirror principle in Axiom B forces you to confront the most uncomfortable truth. The external chaos you protest is a reflection of your internal state. This is the opposite of ignoring reality. It's taking 100% responsibility for your render of it. Running a belief audit in Axiom C is not positive thinking. It's a grueling work of digging through your own cognitive basement, finding corrupted files of fear, trauma, and you are consciously deleting them. This is psychological surgery, not affirmations. The love in the IAC is a strategic imperative, not a sentiment. In an MMO, love and compassion are not just about feeling good. They are advanced co-op mechanics. To act with compassion, the most efficient way to stabilize your reality because it strengthens the entire server you depend on. This is a cold, hard strategic calculation. The greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself, revealed in the IAC as a literal gameplay tip. Since your neighbor's avatar is another I in the same shared simulation, harming them ultimately damages the stability of your own instance. It's like griefing your own team base. The IAC begins by staring directly into the abyss, the pain, the fear, the injustice. And it asks a single, ruthless question. What is the functional, operational truth here? It discovers that the universe operates on a physics of consciousness. Certain mental states, fear, hatred, victimhood, functions like viruses degrading your system and corrupting your reality. While other functions like sovereignty, compassion, and truth, they function like power-ups. This is not hyper-positive thinking, it is metaphysical engineering. The love and light accusation is not a feeling that is blindly trusted. It is observed output of a system running on coherent, constructive code. We're not ignoring the darkness here. We use the IAC as a diagnostic tool to navigate it, to understand it. It is the most powerful and strategic way to overcome game challenges. We don't curse the darkness, but master the mechanics of generating light in the darkness. The IAC is not a passive, optimistic philosophy. It is, at its core, active, demanding discipline. It's the difference between a cheerleader and a special forces soldier. Both might seem positive, but only one is equipped with rigorous, tested strategy for operating effectively in a hostile environment. Anyway, one aspect to soul trap theory is we players tend to be attracted to bad news narratives. Like a moth to a flame, we just seem to gravitate towards the news that's bad. And soul trap is just an extension of another bad news conspiracy theory. So it does draw us towards it. So the IAC would explain that this tendency is not a sign of higher wisdom, but it's a predictable outcome of the game's default settings and the ego's survival mechanism. And that's where this fear-based negative news attraction with the conspiracy theorists comes from. We have in our egos a survival mechanism. Players psychologically and metaphysically are prone to this from an IAC perspective. This is why we are drawn to bad news like a flame. The default is negativity bias of the survival for the avatar. It is the ego's firmware. The base level avatar is programmed for survival in a dangerous world. Its core directive is avoid threats at all cost. This is, a missed opportunity for food, which is positive, is inconvenient. A missed predator, negative, is fatal. The avatar's processing power is inherently biased towards scanning for, weighing, and remembering negative information more heavily than it does positive information. This is well documented as a psychological phenomenon. And in the IAC, it's seen as a default HUD setting of an unupgraded ego. Your base ego setting is look out for danger. A bad news narrative like the soul trap fits this framework perfectly. It identifies a massive, ultimate threat, the trap itself. It feels more serious and real to the survival-oriented mind than a message of hope and sovereignty. Keep in mind, the ego is necessary for the greater I to enter into this game. That is the method in which we allow the avatar to have limitations and the amnesia veil. It is the user interface for the I. But it is built to help the self player navigate the physics engine and navigate it safely. There's also this allure for secret knowledge. It's a conspiracy high. Believing in a complex hidden threat like a soul trap does create a powerful psychological reward. This sense of superiority and control, the player moves from being a confused noob to being part of an enlightened minority, to see the real truth. This is a powerful antidote to a feeling of powerlessness that the amnesia veil often creates. It provides a simple, unifying explanation for all suffering. The chaos of the game now has a clear villain and a clear reason. This is cognitively much easier than holding the complex, paradoxical IAC view that reality is both benevolent school and contains genuine, intense suffering. We basically see the same villainization in witch trials of the past, where any bad event was linked on blaming certain people on being witches, and they were punished on that excuse. The attraction of the soul trap does offer It offers short-term loot, and that loot is the feeling of being smarter and more aware than others. But it hides the long-term cost of existential fear and disempowerment. The ego is also naturally resistant to the surrender protocol listed in Axiom C. The IAC's ultimate path involves a degree of surrender, trusting the vertical comms, aligning with the I, and accepting that the challenges have a purpose. This is deeply threatening to the ego itself, which is built upon the illusion of being soul, separate from the controller. The soul trap theory reinforces the ego's foundational belief. The universe is hostile. I must fight it. It feels more real and active to the ego than the IAC's path of eternal mastery and trust. In a twisted way, the soul trap is comforting to the ego because it confirms the ego's darkness, most paranoid suspicions about the existence, and thereby it's validating its own limited perspective as the ultimate authority. The flame is brighter than the dull glow. The world is often full of mundane suffering. A grand cosmic narrative of betrayal and escape is dramatically more compelling. It is the difference between a movie about someone peacefully meditating versus a movie of a hero uncovering a vast conspiracy and battling the hidden overlords. The IAC path of diligent self-auditing, gradual skill building, and compassionate co-creation seem to be a little slow, a little undramatic, compared to the thrilling and terrifying soul trap narrative. The moth's attention to a flame is not evidence that the flame is good for it. That's a fatal miscalibration. Players are attracted to bad news in the same way, because of their ego. The disempowering conspiracy theories is not evidence of their truth. It's evidence of an unupgraded ego skill tree, still running on the primal fear-based firmware. A corrupted belief in inventory where a virus of distrust is masquerading as wisdom. The failure of sovereignty firewall, allowing the compelling narrative to bypass critical analysis. The IAC goal is to provide the antidote for this default setting. It's the conscious intentional upgrade that allows a player to recognize the bad news flame, for what is a captivating and ultimately destructive simulation within the simulation, designed to test whether you can look past the avatar's deepest instincts and choose a more coherent, constructive, and ultimately true story about the nature of the game you're in. Now, I will say that conspiracies, this soul trap is like a cosmic conspiracy, but there's a lot of conspiracies that I found myself waking up to back in 2008, and I found truth, because the breadcrumb reality will give you their truth, and I found logically a lot of things made sense in an MMO where certain players gain more power over others, and that they would want to amass and solidify the continuity of their power. And that's just logical. But it also can consume your attention and demand more of it than it should be getting. That's probably another conversation about conspiracy theories in general and where our attention as players get focused. Because in the IAC, if your attention is solely focused on the reflection of the mirror, it's a misdirection. You should focus on what is causing the outside environment by looking inward at your belief loadout. And you should be looking inward at developing and building your ego tree from its base level initial spawn point to a larger, more adaptive role. Looking inward in the IAC is always the solution that is pointed to, not looking at the external factors. Conspiracy theory in general looks at the external factors, connects the dots in that way, creates more fear and paranoia, but never fully satisfies and answers. I'm not saying that conspiracy theories are wrong. I'm just saying that they do not bring fulfillment until the player realizes looking outward is pointless. Looking inward needs to be done first. So it eventually will steer you back inward when you realize that the external solutions don't exist, but inward solutions do. One last point about the ego. The ego is not a bug. It's not a mistake to be eradicated like so many gurus say. The ego is your essential user interface. It is for the player to navigate the game. The problem is not that an ego exists. It's that the player sometimes fails to realize that they are the user of the interface and not the interface itself. You've got to look at the purpose of the ego and its critical importance. You need to focus on leveling up your ego tree. The player has an ego. Can you imagine booting up an incredibly complex video game for the first time? You don't start with a blank screen. You start with a default user interface. You have health bars, mini maps, command prompts. The ego is exactly that. It provides a focal point of identity for the I. Without the ego, the universal I, the pure consciousness, would have no point to enter the game. The ego creates this center of narrative gravity, the sense of a continuous I that has a history preference and a location. It is the vessel that allows the infinite player to experience finite, localized story. It is the survival and navigation system. The ego's primary base level programming is survival itself. It processes sensory data, it identifies threats and rewards, and it manages the avatar's basic needs. This is crucial for navigating the early tutorial levels of SoulForge, where physical survival is a primary quest. It is the initial reality Forge SDK. The ego is the first tool you are given to interact with the game's code. It generates the initial unrefined ideas like, I am hungry, this is dangerous, this is mine. These are basic command lines, basic prompts that you learn to use before you can write a more complex code. The ego skill tree is very important for upgrading the survival UI. The player who never upgrades their ego is like a gamer stuck with the default UI, never learning the hotkeys, the advanced targeting systems, the build calculators. They can only play on the easiest difficulty and will be crushed by any complex challenge. The ego skill tree in Appendix C is the process of consciously upgrading the user interface into a more powerful and creative dashboard. It is non-negotiable. You must develop your ego tree, the skill tree of I. The purpose of this is to distinguish the player from the avatar. Without it, you are fused to your avatar. If your avatar is insulted, that means you are insulted. If it fails, that means you are the failure. This is the source of immense unnecessary suffering. You've got to separate yourself from the avatar. With the ego, you can observe the avatar's flaws and limitations with objectivity. You can say, my avatar has a low charisma stat right now. I should work on that. Instead of, I am unlikable as a person. This is the foundation of all growth. Another skill with the ego is a belief audit. Its purpose is to gain root access to your inventory, belief inventory. Without it, you are run by your subconscious, often corrosive belief mods or viruses. You didn't even know that you installed them. Your reality is a glitchy mess and you don't know why. But with your skill tree developed, you become the psyop of your mind. You can consciously delete viruses that say, I'm not good enough. And you can install power-ups. Well, a power-up idea would be challenges will make me stronger. This is the core of active participation. You should also use your emotions as data, not as directives. Emotions, if you don't use your emotions that way, they control you. Fear can paralyze you. Anger can make you toxic. But if you use it properly, fear can become an alert, a scan for perceived threats, Anger can become an alert. A boundary has been crossed. You use emotion as a HUD readout to inform your actions. As you develop your skill tree, you realize that you should not be a psychic sponge absorbing negativity, limitations, and demands of the other players. Your game is constantly being co-opted by other agendas. But if you learn to develop your skill tree, you can interact compassionately with other players without downloading their viruses. You can say no without guilt. Your playthrough is your own playthrough. Another skill to develop in the ego skill tree is the surrender protocol in Axiom 6. You have to deprioritize your ego's short-term demands for the player's long-term objectives. If you don't do this, the ego needs to be right, it needs to stay safe, it needs to validate and run the show. You quit difficult quests and you avoid the very experience that makes you level up. But if you develop your skill tree, you can willingly endure short-term avatar discomfort, like the pain of learning a new skill, for the long-term soul-forging gain. This is how you unlock co-op mode and receive vertical comms. In the beginning, the ego can easily become, if it is not worked on and if it is not mastered, the ego can become a tyrannical, ignorant king, believing it is the sole ruler of the kingdom of self. But as you develop the skill tree, the ego is overthrown and discovers it is not the king, but a royal steward. Its job is not to rule, but to manage the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom under true authority of a benevolent, absent monarch, which is the I player, the oversoul I. And when you master the ego, it can become a wise and loyal steward, perfect harmony with the monarch. The kingdom flourishes because the interface is perfectly aligned with the source of sovereignty. You don't win this game by deleting the ego. You win by promoting it to its most competent and harmonious position. A player without an ego is like a computer without an operating system. Powerful potential, but no way to interact with the world. A player who masters the ego is a conscious co-creator, wielding a flawless interface to expertly navigate and forge their reality. But you can see where the initial ego settings would give way towards a fear-based soul trap theory. So by now we understand the essential importance of the ego, and it is tied to Axiom 1, which is all about realizing that I exist, the conscious I. If the developers of this game had spawned you in without the ego, then you would come in fully actualized. A soul with omnipotent knowing and understanding, no amnesia. You'd be remembering your divine essence, wielding your SDK with perfect clarity. But that would be like reading the last page of a novel. It would escape the path of discovery and challenge. So the game would become meaningless if you spawned in at that level. The basic ego spawn, the very initial stage, is a deliberate design feature. It creates, from the very start of the Forge experience, it creates a point of tension. The Forge, for the game, the Soul Forge requires resistance. The hard hammer against unyielding metal. The ego is that resistance. The gap between the limited I and the limitless I is the fundamental tension of the entire game. Without the ego's sense of separation, fear, and desire, there would be no friction without friction. Without friction, there is no heat. Without heat, there is no forging. You cannot develop courage without fear, compassion without perception or separation, or wisdom without the experience of ignorance. Sorry if you hear some noise in the background. The dogs want me to play fetch. So You're going to hear this dog playing fetch. Anyway, the basic ego provides the raw, unrefined ore of selfhood that the player is meant to temper into a sovereign soul. If you remembered right from the start that you were an eternal divine being playing a temporary game, would your choices have any real weight? Would it be courageous to face a monster that you knew was an illusion? Would it be compassionate to help another player you knew was also an indestructible? The amnesia veil, facilitated by the basic ego, is what gives your choices moral and creative gravity. It makes the stakes feel real. Your decisions matter because, from the perspective of your avatar, they absolutely do, thanks to your basic ego. So the ego helps facilitate a journey of discovery. The goal is not to remember what you were before the game. The goal is to go through this journey of discovery, to discover it for yourself through trial, through error, through suffering and joy. You slowly upgrade your ego skill tree and see the mirror of reality shift in response. It's a transformative and integrated knowledge. It becomes who you are, not just what you think. The basic ego is a blank slate. The journey of the game, the player doing the carving. The final masterpiece is a conscious co-creator who doesn't just possess sovereignty, but has forged it through fire of their own experience. Similar to the analogy of the composer and the instrument, the artist, the canvas, all of that, it comes together. It reunites the higher version of yourself with the avatar version. But the ego does work as a crucible. It is a container that holds the raw experience of separation and limitation. It allows it to be heated by challenge, and it is hammered by the will into a new form. The amnesia veil is the insulation that keeps the heat in, making the experience feel real and urgent. So the forging is authentic. The player at the eye level, the higher level, is the blacksmith. It is using the tools of the IAC, and when I say eye level, I mean the EYE level, the higher level. It is forming the blacksmith. It is using the tools, the SDK, the mirror, the skill tree. You apply conscious pressure and direction to the process. You are not a flawed being who needs to erase yourself. You're a consciousness voluntarily undergoing a process of becoming, not to fix a problem, but to experience the profound glory and creativity of your own nature through the journey of self-overcoming. The basic ego is not a cage, it's the starting block for an epic playthrough, a race to become what you already are, and to know it's not as a given. It's a hard-won victory. And that essentially is the Soul Forger MMO. So this little chat went a little longer than I expected because I guess the whole reason the IAC was drafted was in response to the soul trap theories, and in order to really address it, you have to break apart what is fueling the soul trap theories. So you have to address each fuel point individually, starting with the whole argument that suffering is really the backbone of the soul trap. The existence of suffering and pain has to be addressed first. Anyway, sorry for this being so ridiculously long. Hope you have a good day. God bless.